Matthew 22:37. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." I want to point out the importance of study and thinking to the Christian faith this morning. Loving God involves, according to this verse, your intellect. It involves an intellect that is growing. If you were to say, for instance, "I felt deep things once for God. It was really strong once, long ago. This is no good thing to boast of." You are saying that there had been love perhaps in your heart, but loving God isn't a one-time affair. There is no coming to an end and graduating from having your heart set on God. In the same way, you cannot once, a while back, have studied Scripture. You can't once, back in college, have read a book on theology and thought of God in a new way. You can't once, in your youth, have learned the catechism. That is to say, you cannot graduate from loving God with your mind. The intellect must still be thinking, still be studying and going to school about Him and His teachings, if we are actually loving Him with our mind. And yet there is an anti-intellectual bias in evangelicaldom. We think what matters most is our feelings for Christ. Modern worship shows it. The sermons tend to be short, 20 minutes. Most of the publications I get right now in magazines encourage that. Often they are shallow too, though the magazines don't encourage that. But the worship team, the band, it gets to play for hours. Think about that. So this morning's exhortation is a plea that we embrace serious thinking as part of our loving of God. And so I am appealing to you to buy a book on theology, to go to a reading group that discusses deep things, doctrine, and to come to Sunday school. How are you loving God with your mind? How are you leading your family into loving God with their minds? Obedience requires us to make sure we're taking time, putting into our schedules chances to learn Christ's doctrine, our Christian lifestyle, and the history of His church and the world. In fact, to borrow a line from a sermon I read this week by John Piper called "Think," I like that name. And he said, "Be not victims to evangelical pragmatism, Pentecostal shortcuts, pietistic anti-intellectualism, pluralistic conviction aversion, academic gamesmanship, therapeutic Bible evasion, journalistic bite-sizing, musical mesmerizing, and YouTube craving. All that is half-heartedness. No, let us love God fully with our minds." And this reminds us of our need to confess. So knowing that the law of God calls us to love Him with our minds, hear this scripture of confession, Nehemiah 1:7. "We have acted corruptly against you, and have not kept the commands, the statutes, nor the ordinances which you commanded your servant Moses." And so it is. If you are with us today, you are invited to kneel with us. Come, let us worship and bow down and kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker.